Hi everyone, welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. I'm again talking about the work on oneself. This time I'm talking about working on conceit, which is very related to intellectual arrogance as well as prejudice, which is forming conclusions about things or other people without all of the information that we can have and dismissing them without properly thinking about the circumstances that that person is in. So the reason why I want to talk about this, well, it's just a big problem in general. It's a big unfavorable trait that people can have, but it's particularly rife in today's society. Since the rise of social media, the comments thread of so many public posts are full of people just slinging insults at each other, calling each other stupid and idiots for believing certain things and saying that they're wrong and that the person who's commenting's opinion is right and how could you think that, blah 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 blah. And there's so much of that on the internet now, and it has contributed to fractures within our society and atomization within our society and division and the political polarization that we're now seeing. And it doesn't matter what camp you're in and what your political beliefs are or your spiritual beliefs, there's people on every side who are engaging in this conceited behavior and this conceited way of arguing with other people. And it's not really about convincing anyone of anything, because if it was, they'd stop doing it because it's clearly driving people away further from them. But people argue in this conceited way because it makes them feel better about themselves and it makes them feel superior to other people. And so it's very related to the phenomenon of pride, which I've covered in my previous two videos, which I'll link below. But I want to say some things today that are going to take the wind out of the sails of conceit and try and break down the basis on which we feel a sense of conceit and show that it's completely false. So when you encounter someone, most likely online, but just as easily in real life, who is conceited or intellectually arrogant, whether it's somebody who is a new atheist, talking about people who believe in something spiritual, or whether it's somebody expressing a particular political opinion, the people expressing their view are always very dismissive of the other, and they always just scoff at the other person and just immediately harbour the conclusion that that other person is stupid or ignorant. And they don't actually take the time of day to investigate the cause for that person's point of view or for their own point of view because they're so convinced that they're right. And so it comes from this place of believing that they are intrinsically more intelligent, smarter than the other person, and also morally better than the other person, and just a better human being in general. There's something about their nature which is superior to the other person's, which means that they have all of these illustrious ideas about the way the world really is that other normal people don't have. But it's all self-indulgence and it's all false. There's no person who is more objective than anybody else. There's no person who has a more intrinsic ability to see things as they are, to know the truth more than other people. Each and every one of us is a product of our environment. And even when we have a more developed ability to think critically than other people, again, it's because of the way that we were raised or because of something that we were exposed to that we're able to develop that ability. And this is something that I began to realize when I started to do the work on myself. So shortly before I discovered the work on oneself and acknowledged that it is a worthwhile thing to do as a spiritual practice, it was sort of in the aftermath of the Brexit vote and America voting for Donald Trump. And I was one of those people who dismissed the people that voted for Brexit and Trump as just idiots, as racists and sexists, and that was the end of it. That was the only explanation that I needed. A really kind of elitist view of these other people. But as I began to work on myself, and I began to analyse my own opinions and my own point of view and the reason for that, I began to realise that I wasn't as smart as I thought I was. And all of the opinions that I held, I adopted in the same way that the people that voted for Brexit or Trump adopted their views, more or less. So I started to think about where my political views had come from, where my different social attitudes came from, and I was able to trace them back. And I realised that the kinds of views that I held a lot of them were very typical of somebody who comes from a middle class background like I do. They were very typical of someone who lives in the kind of area, the suburb that I lived in, that I grew up in, and the voting track record of the kind of people that live there. And they were very typical of people who went to the sorts of schools that I went to, who had a tertiary education like I did, and they were very typical of people who hung out in the kinds of friend groups that I hung out in. So all of those things clearly were the origin of many of my beliefs and opinions. And that's not entirely true. I adopted beliefs and opinions which were very different from where I'd come from. But even then, I was raised in conditions where I had more opportunities to develop the ability to think critically. So even that is a product of my environment. And when I realised that, it was very humbling. And I realised it's not because I'm smarter than everybody else. It's not because I'm gifted with some special ability to discern objective truth that nobody else has. And that's something inherent as a personality trait. No, it's all to do with conditioning. That's why I have the opinions that I have. And when I realised that if I had been born in somewhere like Trump's America, who's to say that I would have not had the same opinions as those people? I mean, there's a chance that I wouldn't have, but there's no way of me knowing that. And so the only way that you can be sure that you wouldn't be like other people who just reflect their social conditioning is if you are doing the work on yourself, if you are making a conscious effort to overcome habits that you've developed through conditioning somewhere along the line in order to live consciously. That's the only way that you can really be sure that you're not committing the same error that the people you criticize for being stupid are also committing. And this is something in particular that people who think that they're more socially enlightened need to learn. It's a lesson that they badly need to learn. Because them looking down on other people who had different opinions to them came at a great price. If you look at what really happened with Donald Trump being elected, if those people who see themselves as some sort of intellectual elite were able to put themselves in the shoes of a Trump voter, they would put themselves in the shoes of somebody who worked hard their entire life, but never seemed to get ahead and was left behind by the outsourcing of manufacturing, and looked to the Democratic Party to hear their voice and was met instead with somebody who was university educated telling them to check their privilege. So when you phrase it like that and you try and understand that experience of the person, you can see how they would become a bit upset. And it's not an excuse for voting for somebody who is a complete demagogue and tyrant, but you begin to understand and see how if somebody allowed themselves to be overcome by those feelings of resentment, that it could be very easily manipulated by a malignant narcissist in order to push the country in a destructive direction. But are the people who criticise Trump voters the loudest really any different? Would they really behave any different? Well, we have an opportunity to observe that by seeing if there's any progressive equivalence of the angry mob represented by the stereotype of the Trump voter. And you have to say that the other side of politics have got their unreasonable angry mobs as well, who seem incapable of critical thought and just parrot the opinions that they've been told to parrot and just condemn people based on really superficial judgments. So they're not as smart or enlightened as they think they are. You know, Napoleon once said, "Those who free themselves from common prejudices acquire others." So you might not have common prejudices, but you may very well have uncommon prejudices. But prejudice is prejudice, and conceit is conceit. So if you are really against the kind of prejudice that you observe in other people, start with yourself. And if you're not living consciously and you're not aware of your own prejudices and trying to correct that, you're really in no position to give a moral lecture to other people. So before you tell other people to check themselves, make sure you're checking yourself first. So that's my video on conceit. Perhaps a hard lesson for some people, but a necessary lesson in this political climate, no matter what side you're on. So leave your comments down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.